The floor was nowhere near as comfortable as the bed, but it at least seemed semi-warm. I stretched out a yawn as I heard a loud knocking in my ears. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, when the knocking turned into a pounding, making my head hurt. "Captain! Captain, get up! The cloud cover's gone, and I think the storm blew us off course." A Stellian's voice called out the door. I smirked as I laid there, thinking how odd it was to be referred to as Captain Backlash. I don't know why, but I kinda liked it. I should make Brass call me Captain from now on. "Hold on to your bits, I'm coming." The gravelly voice of Captain Tempest, in the bed above me, spoke so loud that it almost hurt. Right. I'm still on a boat, and definitely not the captain of said boat. I opened my eyes slowly, sitting up far too quickly and hitting my head on the bed frame above me. I rubbed the back of my head as I regained my focus, watching as the old ghoul kicked out one of the empty bourbon bottles from last night across the floor. He levitated his coat and hat on as he stood, making sure they were on just right before opening the door. I winced and covered my eyes as an amazingly bright light poured in from outside. A calm, cool breeze blew into the room that made my flank feel extremely good, seeing as I think I had managed to go the entire night without getting off. Now, if only the breeze could somehow soothe my aching pride. I slowly pulled myself out and across the floor with a groan, getting to my hooves with little problem. A good day's rest, and my body loved me again. Well, I think it was a day. Willow never actually did tell me. Regardless, onward to the outside. I stepped forward and hoofed at the door handle, pulling it open and blinding myself from the outside light. I slammed the door shut and blinked a few times. The odd afterimage of calm waters seemed eerily blue to me. I quickly threw the captain's blanket around me, like a cloak, and opened the door again, now able to withstand the onslaught of light, as I squinted hard enough. I stood in shock as I looked out over the bright blue water, tracing it away from the boat to where it continued with where the horizon should be. But it kept going. It was like it was in my dreams. It was the actual big blue sky. "Don't just stand there," the captain called from my left, leaning out over what must have been the wheelhouse, which wouldn't be surprising, except it was up a flight of stairs, and the front of the ship went on for another 20 yards past it. "Get up here and out of that blasted sunlight before you get burned," he said, before disappearing back inside, the squeaking sound of the steel hatch grinding away at my hungover brain. I slowly turned my head and looked down at the rear end of the ship, quite amazed to see that it went on for another 20 yards. I've seen ships this size moored at Friendship Island every now and again, but I'd never actually seen one this close. I've never even heard that any of them ever head south to Philadelphia. Not to say that it never happened, but this whole mess is just one great enigma I needed to figure out. I made my way to the stairs, climbing up to the deck house as the door swung open again. "Oh, hey Backlash, isn't this great?" Brass shouted gleefully. "We're on a boat!" He giggled and ran past me and down the stairs. "If only Mom could see me now." I groaned as my stomach gurgled at the word boat. I know I've been looking at it, and I feel that we've been bobbing up and down, but my brain for some reason wasn't convinced it was real until he said it. I quickly ran down the steps and threw myself against the railing, throwing up again as I purged the cocktail that had been mixing in my gut overnight. I coughed as I hung limply, looking into the water, and watching as a few flicks of silver traveled up to the spreading sickness. A large fish schooled around it for a moment before deciding it wasn't food and swimming off. I heard a low, single rumble of thunder on the horizon, looking up for the storm clouds, but found none. I was just about to mention it to Brass when I heard a loud whistle in the air. I curled up and ducked against one of the railings as a large black object crashed into the water and exploded maybe 15 yards away. "You have entered a restricted Enclave military zone. Cut your engines and prepare for inspection." The amplified voice of a stern mayor came from above, drawing my gaze to the lowering vertibuck over the rear of the ship. "The Enclave wishes that you know that your cooperation is highly appreciated." I pulled myself back off the railing, slowly making my way to the back of the ship as the door and on the side of the large black vehicle opened. 4 armored Pegasi trotted out and formed in 2 pairs, each group heading up separate sides of the ship. Their exotic-looking magical energy weapons, shiny carapaces, and bug-eyed helmets made them look like otherworldly invaders from the Space Captain Andromeda comics I used to read as a colt. I watched as they turned and disappeared into the ship without a word. Captain Tempest was walking down from the deck, slowly, as the other crew ponies on board went about their various tasks. "You there! Remove your cloak!" The mayor's voice called out from the vertibux hatch, making me cringe. The way she ordered me to do things reminded me of Strawberry Sherbert, a military pony through and through. I turned to object, finding a sheet ripped over my head as she tore it off. I squinted and raised my hoof to cover my eyes, only to find her take my hoof and twist it painfully. Before I knew what happened, somehow finding myself flat on the deck, next to her. I clenched my eyes shut as the bright sunlight beat down on me. Attempting to assault an officer while inspecting the breach of a forbidden zone is a violation of the Civilian Enforcement Act under Article 4, subsection 7. She tweaked her hold of my hoof, making me whine as pain shot through my shoulder. You are to be held as the Enclave prisoner until a court can be convened to try you for your offenses. "Oh, cut your yapping. What's your chest say? Major?" Captain Tempest shouted as he approached. "The only thing he's guilty of is having a hangover. He's not in any shape to fight. I mean, just look at him. Black eye, light sensitivity, and absolutely no coordination." I wasn't sure if I should be glad he was defending me, or insulted by the way he was going about it. "Other than him, the HMS Gallant and her crew are at your service." I felt as the Enclave mare loosened her grip, slightly, but not enough to let me go. "As the captain, I expect you to keep a tighter rein on your crew members." She released my hoof and stepped back. "And you're correct. Major Silver Star of Enclave R&D. You've entered a restricted area, Captain. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but inspections are part of the rules. I'm sure we'll be out of your main in no time. Can I ask you why you've entered this area?" I got to my hoof slowly, looking up at the very official-sounding mare. She wore a tight-fitting, dark green suit over her light pink coat, a pantheon of small medals on it, showing that she was quite adept at her job. Her silver mane glinted out in the sunlight, only matched in intensity by her equally silver eyes. She frowned as I looked over her, Captain Tempest moving to speak, before being cut off from behind. "Ma'am, we've found something." The low voice of a stallion droned as he poked his helmet out of the side of the ship. The young officer brushed past me and trotted towards the open hatch. The captain and I followed curiously as she spoke, as she dipped inside. "Let go of me!" Skyline called out as she was dragged up from the stairs, on the back of one of the soldiers, her forelegs and wings bound together with rope. "Backlash! Get them off of me!" "Skyline!" I tried to push past the officer, which I should have known was a bad idea. But then again, that's why I normally like to talk before acting. Once again, I found myself inexplicably on the floor, my chest hurting. At this time, my hoof was pulled around my back painfully. "Let go of my sister!" I yelled out against the cold steel floor. "She's your sister?" The major asked boredly in disbelief. "Unlikely. Her palate doesn't even begin to match yours as siblings should. We'll have to run her through the system to see if she's a runaway. You two, take her to the vertibus." I listened as no pony moved a muscle, silence filling the air before the major spoke up again. "Private, I give you an order." And now, the smooth voice of Carlotta preceded the sharp click of her service pistol's hammer, locking back. "You're gonna rescind that order." Ah, Celestia, the damn griffin knows how to save our flanks. "I'll have you know that interfering with the detonation..." Silver Star spoke with authority, drifting off midway through a sentence as I heard Carlotta's armor crack slightly before Silver Star released her grip on me. "And I'm telling you that I don't care. Now let my mare friend go, or I'll make sure that a bruised ego is the least of your injuries today. I turned my head and watched as the Pegasus mare stepped over me and turned around slowly, looking Carlotta dead in the eyes. Do as she says. Cut her loose. Silverstar said without taking her eyes off the armed griffin. I'm only going to give you all one chance. If you don't surrender, I am authorized to send this boat and its occupants into the murky depths below. She lowered her gaze as Skyline's bindings were cut off quickly, using her muzzle to gesture for the soldiers to head out. And that is not a threat. If you refuse, it is a promise. I only ask that you reconsider for the sake of every pony on board. I only ask that you run your pretty little self along and get back to your transport, and be glad you can still run away with your tails between your legs. Carlotta cooed as the soldiers stepped up past us, trotting back towards the vertibuck. The Major walked past me slowly, keeping a wide berth around Carlotta. Oh, and Major? The Pegasi stopped mid-step, looking over with a glare that could melt steel. I'd like you to know that your cooperation is highly appreciated. We all breathed a sigh of relief as the Major turned the corner, treading back down the deck towards the waiting vertibird. Skyline bolted up the steps and pressed into Carlotta, hugging her tightly as the Griffin put her pistol back on safe. Captain Tempest, do the deck guns still work? Carlotta called out as the old ghoul stepped back outside. Wait, deck guns? What kind of fishing boat has deck guns? How did I miss them? You betcha, Miss Carlotta. Just gotta ward him off the old targeting system from the bridge. He yelled back as he turned towards the stairway, trotting up it as the dark transport dipped along the side of the boat. I watched curiously out the hatch as the flying ship shimmered in the light of the sun, skimming over the water to slowly pivot around to face us. Carlotta, what's going on? Sky asked in a panicked voice, prodding the stern Griffin as she stood with a frown. Why do we need the guns? Aren't they going to just leave? Sorry. She was lying. If we don't fight, she'll sink the ship. Carlotta ran her talons through Skyline's mane, keeping her expression cold. It's us or them, and I'd rather not lose you, or Backlash. It wouldn't look very good on my record if I let a client die. I heard the low drone of hydraulics powering up from outside, piquing my curiosity as Longbow and Brass ran up the stairs in a panic. Backlash! They've left a bomb on board! Both of them called out in near unison. Brass stepped in front of Longbow. We need you down here. You have to disarm it. I turned and followed them down the stairway, heading below deck to see a long corridor with the expectation of the bulkheads running the length of the ship. They led me into the forwardmost room, where a willow was staring underneath a large wooden table that had been bolted to the floor. I pushed past Longbow and got down low on the floor, looking up to see a large brick of plastic explosives wired to some sort of plastic and brass clock mechanism, which had all been screwed onto the table. I let out a low whistle when I looked it over. Each piece of the clock was held in place by an extremely small pin that, if tampered with, could jam the inner workings of the machine. Each screw had a wire running into it, probably a failsafe against removal. We need your skills at taking things apart. We've seen wiring like this before, and can walk you through disarming it, but your hooves and muzzle are a lot more steady than my magic. Longbow said as she got down low to me. If you try to separate it from the charge, it'll explode. If you stop the timer, it'll explode. If you try to unscrew it from the table, it'll explode. She let out a soft sigh. Her look gave me a hint of sadness. I've seen this kind of bomb before. They only give access to this kind of thing to training of star paladins or stealth experts. That's the only reason I can recognize it. The room shuddered as the deck gun above fired, the boom drifting off quickly into the open ocean before the rear guns fired as well. With that gun firing, steady hooves mean nothing, but maybe if this is designed anything like an alarm clock, then... I slid myself around the front of the table, getting a look at the other side of it. I watched as the gears and springs inside twisted and clicked. Yes, the mainspring should still be wound, although not very tightly, I said as I pushed myself back. The room shook again as the guns fired, resounding a crack as the round ripped into the vertibuck and echoed back shortly before the loud whoosh of a rocket passing above us. We have an hour, maybe an hour and a half before it goes off. I was thrown onto the table as the ship retched sideways, the blast of a rocket hitting the back of the ship filling my ears temporarily with the sound of ringing. I flopped back to the floor and stared up at the time bomb screwed into the table above me, hoping that we survived that long enough to either disarm it or to make it to shore. The smell of smoke and sounds of shouting above prompted me to slide out from under the table and get back up. Longbow's horn glowed as her armor let out a loud set of clicks, opening up as she quickly jumped out of it. "Brass, take my suit and help the captain." She yelled at him with an assertive voice, then turned to me. "Backlash, you need to go with him. I need time to form an idea of how to deal with the bomb in case you can't disarm it." I kind of like it when you order me around like that. I grinned over to her as she sighed with a frown, turning and running down the smoky hallway towards the stairwell. Brass rolled his eyes as he walked over to the suit, his horn glowing brightly as I heard a pantheon of clicks and whirls inside of it. The cloth lining was rearranging itself inside, changing sizes to fit somebody else's size. "Go and find out what we need to do to help." Brass barked up at me as he did his best to copy Longbow. I mulled over the idea of tormenting him over it later, at the fact that he kept trying to hit on me, watching as he stopped and stared at me in confusion. "Go on! This'll only take me a minute." He shooed me away with his hoof. I turned to climb the stairs to the deck, coughing as I walked clear of the billowing smoke. "Aye! You morons get below deck and put out those fires!" Captain Tempest screeched to the two stallions who were trying to spray down a blaze that was raging on near deck, smoke starting to go up into the sky from the twisted hole that ripped through the side of the ship. A red streak of movement caught my eye out along the water. The smoking remains of the vertibuck was strewn over a wide area. Skyline was circling along with Carlotta, hopefully looking for survivors. "I knew, Backlash! Don't just stand there. Get down there and help the poor lads put it out. I can't restart the engines when it's on fire." The captain's worried voice pulled me back into focus before he climbed the stairs up to the deckhouse. Another boom on the horizon caught my attention. The slowly moving explosive shell arced towards us, coming down between the boat and the vertibuck wreck. Whatever the Enclave were guarding, had to be pretty impressive to fire shells over the horizon with even that much accuracy. I backtracked a ways down the hallway that was now completely full of smoke. I crouched as low as I could get and wished I still had that blanket to help me breathe. I yelled to get over the now constant roar of the fire that raged somewhere below us. "Brass, are you ready yet?" "Yeah, I'm here." The heavy steps of the power armor vibrated on the floor slightly, reminding me that there was maybe still a pony's height of space underneath our hooves that kept us from the bottom of the sea. He activated the lantern on the helmet and levitated a fire extinguisher from the wall, shaking the hose in front of himself as we came up to the first sealed bulkhead. I put my hooves through the wheel and grunted, spinning it to unlatch the door. I pulled it open slowly as smoke poured through it. The orange flames of the raging inferno shot out the open side of the boat. "Stay back!" Brass shouted as he walked up. The unnerving groan of melting steel filled the choking air before he squeezed the handle of the 120-year-old device. Nothing came out. Brass shook the device in frustration, depressing the release lever with his magic a few times before throwing the device onto the floor. "Damn! The valve was probably corroded shut. We need to get the sprinkler system working." I waved my hoof towards the ceiling, trying to clear the smoke. A heavily rusted iron pipe ran between the sprinklers on the top of the wall, a thin red wire just above one of it, disappearing into small boxes that were connected into each nozzle above the pipe. As long as the engines were off, the system didn't have any power feeding it. "Brass, can you cast a spark spell on the sprinkler line?" Spark spell?" His voice came through the speaker hesitantly. He sounded ashamed? "No, I'm sorry. I don't know how." He lowered his head and scuffed the floor with his hoof. I only know how to use telekinesis and light. Those are the only two spells I've ever needed. And that's fine, Brass. It's not like you've ever needed to save a burning ship before. I tried to comfort him, flopping down to the floor to avoid the thickening smoke. The system should have its own compression, so all we need to do is get those lines open, and the water will come out on its own. If only we could jump the engine, even if it's just for a moment. The gears in my head whirled to life, and struck a crazy thought into my head. That's it. Brass, I need you to find me a good length of wiring, and either a spark battery or a small energy crystal. He looked confused for a moment before disappearing back through the hatch. I kept myself low and looked along the metal floor, feeling about in the thickening smoke for nearly a minute before I could feel the handle of a latch. I hoofed it open, opening it to reveal the maintenance access for the below-deck bilge pumps, and pulled myself into the small space. I wedged myself as low as I could get, my head barely sticking above the floor as I heard Brass step back into the smoky hallway. The thought that I was sitting maybe only a half an inch above the depths sent a chill down my spine. Backlash! He called out, his voice booming through the suit. I'm back, but the smoke is thick enough that I can't see, even with the headlamp on. I'm over here. I waved my hoof out of the hole as I found the old pump and followed its wiring back, stopping as I realized what he just said. Just follow the sound of my voice. I should only be a few steps away. I looked out of the hole just in time for him to step on my face. Celestia, I'm sorry, he cried out, stepping back and lowering himself to the floor. Longbow gave me a small energy crystal, and this much wire. He floated the small roll of wire that I hoped to Celestia was long enough, and dropped both items next to me as I rubbed my sore nose. What next? When I tell you, levitate the other end of the wire up to one of those boxes that sits over the sprinkler system. I leaned down and bit down on the wire, unspooling it as I hoofed the plastic pump circuit housing open. Just as I thought it would be, the energy crystal was cracked, and insulated wiring was corroded, leaving the contacts exposed. I leaned in and threaded the new wire around behind the exposed one. Another large blast shook the entire ship as the Enclave gun closed in on us. I continued to wrap the wiring around, struggling to find a way to keep it connected. This would be much easier if I didn't dump all this stuff in my saddlebags and lose my saddlebags anyway. The extremely discomforting groan emanated from the length of the ship. If we couldn't get this fire out, the steel frame could give way and take us straight to the bottom. I watched as the wire glowed softly, Brass's magic helping to secure it. Backlash, you don't have to do this all on your own. I'm here, and all you have to do is ask for help. He spoke down, now trying to comfort me. I smiled to myself and hooped the wire back up and out of the hole, watching as he floated it up towards the wall. Backlash? The wire isn't long enough. Damn it! I yelled and slammed my hoof on the floor. Without the pump, I can't transfer the power. I knocked my head against the floor plate above. Think. I have an idea, Brass said slowly, his words hinting that he didn't really want to use that idea. I heard him reposition himself, the wire going taut. Okay, Backlash. Turn it on, he said, for some reason anticipating pain. Brass, what are you doing? I asked, standing up and digging my hooves against the floor plate to pull myself out. Backlash, stay down there. He called over sternly. I'm using the suit as a bridge to the circuit. Just trust me. It's the only way this will work. You don't understand, Brass. These crystals carry enough charge to fire magical energy weapons. That means the holds enough charge to kill a pony 10 times over. I strained and pulled myself out of the hole, coughing enough as the black smoke stung my eyes. Backlash. I know the risks. He coughed as he spoke with a hint of sadness. Besides, if it doesn't work, we'll all be dead anyway. He turned off the lamp of his helmet with another chuckle. Best thing that happens is that it only fries the suit, and Longbow will be pissed enough to throw me overboard while I'm still in it. I laughed nervously as the gears in my head not giving me another solution. Well, you're gonna have to be the one to tell her that you fried it. I'm already to blame for wrecking yours. I slid myself into the confined space, scooping the small red crystal into my hoof. Hold on to your butt. I scraped the old crystal away, hoofing the new one into place. The pump let out a groan before sputtering a few times and dying, running just enough that the current through the wire that I'd put through the sprinkler system valve opened the sprinkler valves with a screech. I heard Brass let out a scream before the armor dropped to the floor. The wire falling from his magic faded. The pressurized water immediately sprayed out along the hallway. The hiss of cooling steel was music to my ears as I scrambled out of the hole. Brass? Talk to me, Brass! I coughed and stumbled through the bulky suit, feeling as my hoof pressed against the chest plate. I leaned down and pressed my ear against the side of it, listening through it as best I could, trying to block out the world around me. Brass, I need you to say something! My ear twitched as I thought I heard something, but frowned as only silence followed. Ow. The muffled sound came from inside, making me gasp and laugh. And the sprinklers going off was the sound of music. The set of clicks that came from the unhatching armor was like me hearing music for the first time. You never appreciate any sound the same way after that. Brass let out a groan as the water sprayed down onto him, looking up at me slowly. You're in the afterlife as well? Then this must be hell. He grinned and stiffly got to his hooves. I smiled and prodded down at him. Yeah, well, at least you know why I hate boats now. I wheezed and choked, stumbling forward. We should probably leave. Brass and I trotted forward, stepping through the bulkhead with relief, and Brass using his magic to close and seal the door. The both of us were gasping to take in large amounts of less smoky air. I trotted over to the stairwell, climbing up towards the bright light streaming in from outside, as I heard Captain Tempest laughing. Don't worry, Major. I won't hurt ya. I'm sure that if left up to her, she'd have left you out there to die. Major Starr was still alive. That's the first good news I've heard today. Maybe we can convince her that the Enclave should just leave us alone. What am I thinking? She's probably got some supervillain pot all cooked up that she's going to spill out and practically beg every pony to try and stop. And you know what? 2 supervillains is enough for me. We'll have to find somebody else for that fight. I'm on fucking vacation for now. When I get off this scrap heap, I'm going to make sure that the Enclave sends out every last Shadowbolt to hunt you down. She raged as I stepped outside, tugging and struggling against the line of rope Carlotta was finished tying around her. The Major huffed and flopped down, her fury receding slightly. Look, if you let me go and turn yourselves in, I'll do my best to get you life imprisonment, but I can't promise you that. Just shut your muzzle while I'm still trying to keep us afloat. Captain Tempest yelled back as he walked up to me, not even flinching as the Enclave cannon fired again. I watched as the round whistled overhead, barely missing us. Please tell me you managed to put out that fire. We've drifted into their range, and they're getting a wee bit too close for my comfort. I nodded and shook the water off myself as best I could. Yes, if you couldn't tell, I got the fire suppression system working again. Captain Tempest turned and bolted up the stairs with an amazing amount of spryness for a 150-year-old pony. I swung my gaze down to Silver Star, watching as she glared at me, turning her gaze to Longbow as she walked out behind me. So, Major, about that bomb you left downstairs. Bomb? What bomb? She looked back at me, genuinely confused. The one you placed under the table, in there. Longbow shouted, smacking the tied-up mare with her hoof. Don't play coy. Longbow, she's telling the truth. I put my hoof on her shoulder. But... Longbow looked back at me, even more worried than before. Then who put it there? The Enclave were the only other ponies with access to tech like that. Other than you Steel Rangers. Silver Star glared up at Longbow spitefully. Was this incursion a plan by the Elders? How much do they know about the project? I watched as Longbow pushed me out of the way with her hoof, and put a hoof on Silver's neck. The Pegasi mare slumped over more before I had a chance to react. "What are you doing?" Sky shouted, diving down from above to shove Longbow off her, leaning down and putting an ear to her chest. "You're lucky you didn't kill her." "Calm down. I just hit the same point that Isaac hit on the doctor." She rolled her eyes and looked over at me. "Backlash, we need to have a talk later." And with that, she walked inside, disappearing as Skyline hoisted the Major onto her back. "As do we." Sky glared and strained to carry the mare as she turned towards the door. "Just come find me once you're done up here. I'm going to see if I can help out with anything else." The deck below us rumbled as the arcane engines came back to life, the entire boat jerking and rolling slightly as the captain steered us away from the Enclave guns. I walked across the deck as we pulled through the smoke that had plumed from earlier, walking up the steps to ask him where the closest civilized area was, and if we could make it there in the next 45 minutes. If not, the Enclave might have been our only chance to get out of here. "What do you mean, 3 hours?" I plopped my flank on the floor as we steamed ahead across the giant blue expanse before us. We had gotten out of range of the Enclave guns, but 40 minutes was all I was willing to estimate was left on the bomb below us, and it was too risky to disarm. "I'm already giving her all she can take." Captain Tempest hadn't even taken his gaze off the horizon as we spoke. "Any more and I'm risking tearing her in half. Have you not seen the gaping hole back there?" "Yeah, and I've also seen the giant deck guns that are kind of out of place on a fishing vessel." I walked up to the windshield and pointed my hoof to the boxy, computer-like controlled cannon on the lower deck. "That missile should have blown this boat in half, but it didn't, because this ship is armored for some reason. Not to mention, you were randomly sailing along the Delamere and found us? That all spells out a completely different story to me." I turned and looked to the captain, seeing that he was now looking at me with a defeated expression. "You are correct, that we didn't just happen upon you by chance, and that I've been sailing the galleon for these 130 years now. That mare and her ministry put those monstrosities on my ship, arming her for some reason, for some excuse about not having enough patrol boats for the coast." He smacked his hoof on the wheel. "Said I'd be doing my part to defend Equestria, right before they went and blew it all to hell. Now I can't even take this blasted thing off of her, seeing as no pony has equipment to do it." He looked sad as he spoke about his ship, but I couldn't blame him, seeing as I failed just as strongly about the Marauder. But finding us still didn't make any sense. Why couldn't I just have asked last night when we were drunkenly swapping life stories? "But why were you in Philly?" "For the same reason any pony would. 'Cause I got paid to be there. Was told I might find some folk needing a ride to Manhattan." Captain Tempest sounded hesitant, like he probably shouldn't have said anything about it. "Look, I'm grateful that you helped save my ship, and I might consider talking about it later. But right now we've got bigger problems on our hooves." I sighed and turned to leave. Yeah, but this conversation isn't over. I walked over to the door, hesitating as I contemplated pressing him for more. My knees felt wobbly for a moment, drawing my attention down to them before the door swung open, slumming into the top of my head. I backpedaled and sat down while I saw stars in my vision. "Oh, geez, sorry, Backlash. I didn't expect anybody to be there," Brass called out, popping the door open. "Also, I took care of that bomb." "Do you normally expect ponies to stand behind doors?" I growled out as I got up and stumbled forward, rubbing my sore head with my hoof. I looked up as my vision returned to normal, watching Brass puff off his chest with pride. "Wait, what did you say? How did you disarm it?" "We didn't need to," Brass nearly yelled, barely containing his excitement. He was positively vibrating as I stared at him in confusion. "Come on, I know you want to ask." "I'll humor you this once. Only because you nearly burnt your flank off down there to save us." I smiled and sighed. "How'd you do it?" "Well, you couldn't remove it from the table without setting it off, right?" He turned and pointed his hoof out towards the sea, nodding for me to take a look. I walked over to the door, staring in disbelief at the sight before me. Carlotta and Sky were placed on each side of a large, brown rectangle, slowly drifting over the water away from us. No pony said I couldn't just remove the table from the boat. Level up. Plus 11 repair, plus 4 survival. New perk, Technomancer. You are the MacGyver of your generation. There isn't something you can't do with at least a little WD-40, duct tape, and inspiration. When using the repair skill on inventory items, you no longer need a duplicate item to restore durability, just an item of the same base type. When using repair on any other object, you receive a bonus 5 points to repair it if you are carrying scraps associated with the item, i.e., electronics for terminals, tubing for hydraulics, etc.